Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2016. Before I do so, Mr. President, please allow me to take this opportunity to extend heartfelt congratulations to a young Grenadian, Mr. Ali Dowden, who only 2 or 3 days ago was given the prestigious award by Her Majesty the Queen, or nominated and accepted as a Commonwealth Young Leader.
Yeah.
Mr. President, this is the very first time that any Grenadian has had bestowed upon him or her that particular honor. Only 60 persons in the community of nations, that includes over 1 billion young people, have selected, and of those 60, Grenada is proud to have one of them. Mr. Dowden is an executive member of our party, a young man of incredible talent and maturity, who has dedicated a lot of his time and his life to working and assisting those who are more disadvantaged, people suffering from kidney problems, as a leader in the Kidney Foundation, from cancer and the Cancer Society, and the organization known as the Friends for the Mentally Ill, also working with young persons who are suffering from this debilitating condition. So we want to take this opportunity, Mr. President, to sincerely congratulate Mr. Ali Dowden. Mr. President, I ask you for a moment to just imagine you're going on a trip somewhere. The trip is going to be 9.5 hours long.
It's not Taiwan.
Not Taiwan.
Okay.
Not Taiwan. We'll talk about Taiwan in a moment. But you're a passenger in that car, and there are 2 other persons with you, 2 drivers. You are not driving. The 2 drivers are going to share the driving. The first driver drives for 4.5 hours, and the second driver has now taken control of the car and will drive for the remaining 5 hours. When the first driver was driving, the second driver complained. He said the first driver can't drive. He was boasting how he can drive better. He knows the route. He knows the best and the fastest way to get there. And now he's in control of the car. He's in the driver's seat. He controls the levers of the car. He has absolutely no one to bother him, not even in the front seat. Nobody's sitting in the front seat with him. In other words, you and the other driver are now in the back seat, and he alone is sitting in the front seat. So there's not even a passenger in the front to bother him. The second driver, now in control of the car, instead of driving with certainty and confidence, demonstrating the competence that he boasted about, is now bungling his way every step of the way and spending all his time blaming the previous driver for everything. What would you think of that second driver, Mr. President? Would you conclude that this man is a man who is self-assured, confident, knows what he's doing? Or would you conclude that this is a man of straw, who is simply excited about the thrill of driving, not really where you're going and what the destination is and when you're going to get there? The thrill is in driving the car itself. That's all he's concerned about, no matter how he bungles along the way. This is the pitiful state in which our Prime Minister finds himself, Mr. President, and I'll tell you why. In a more than 2-hour presentation, in which the Prime Minister is expected to tell the nation What are his plans and programs for getting our country growing and keeping it growing? For creating jobs for the thousands of unemployed young persons who have finished school with their certification in many cases, have nothing to do, for getting small businesses up and running, for attracting foreign investors, for reviving our agriculture and tourism sectors, for reducing the cost of energy, those kinds of issues. He spends his time blaming the NDC for his failures and his inability to deliver. So that in a 2-hour presentation, he blames the previous administration 14 times. You are in the driver's seat, and you're blaming the organization and the former government 14 times. Mr. President, the problem is not the previous administration. The problem is that there's a capacity problem. The Prime Minister is his capacity problem. The Prime Minister simply does not understand the fundamentals of economic management. He's simply stabbing in the dark in the hope that he would get enough things right to be able to remain in power. That's really what this whole thing is about. In the hope that he would get enough things right, and I'll demonstrate that. But today, Mr. President, I say to the Prime Minister, when you are in the driver's seat, drive the car. Stop complaining, drive the car. Do not sit and blame others for where the car is going. Mr. President, there's a reason why the rearview mirror of a car, in a car, is so much smaller than the windscreen. Because the rearview mirror is there so that the driver can take occasional glances into that mirror. Look back, take a glance, but focus through the lens of the windscreen on where you're going. It's big and wide and open so that you can see where you're going and you can maneuver the changes and you can think through the steps and maneuvers you're going to take along the way. If you spend the time, there's a reason why the car is designed that way. If you spend the time looking in the rearview mirror and trying to drive, you're going to kill somebody and you might kill yourself. And that is what we are doing. We are heading over a precipice by a man who is trying to drive, and instead of driving the car and looking through the windscreen, going forward, he's looking in the rearview mirror and blaming everybody behind him. Mr. President, this is what we are facing. We want to encourage the minister to stand up in the mirror, stand up like a man. Face the reality. You are in the driver's seat. Stop the blaming and drive. You are now in there for 2.5, almost 3 years. It will soon be 5 years and you're out. Are you going to spend all your time blaming somebody? Or are you going to get a hold of yourself and drive the car? That is what we are seeing. And Mr. President, this is very frustrating, to say the least. Not for myself personally, because I understand it, but I'm sure for the nation. Those citizens who really would like to see Grenada move forward and would like to see something different. Mr. President, if that was the only shortcoming that we were seeing, some persons may even accept it. But what is most objectionable is that instead of owning up to the limitations, the driver is deliberately withholding information from the passengers, manufacturing and disseminating a pack of what I call zero truths. I'm not going to call them lies. They're on a spectrum. You have truth, half-truths, and zero truths. And what we're seeing here is a pack of zero truths are being presented, inaccuracies, innuendos about the conduct and character of the former driver who was driving the car, in the hope that his own mischief would be overlooked and somehow people will continue to hate and dislike the former driver because he can't handle the problem. So what we see in really are these deceptive innuendos and misrepresentations. But, Mr. President, we must not let these things go unchallenged. We must not let these things go unanswered. We must explain it because there are a number of young persons who have voted for this government. A person who would have been, who is now 20 years old, would have been born in 1995 when this government came into office. So that this person has absolutely no, first came into office, so that these young people have no idea who this man is and what is his track record. What has he done to this country? And therefore, we must take the time to ensure that the Grenadian young people especially understand who they're dealing with. This is not about putting on tight pants and dyeing your hair and dancing. This is about managing an economy, and we must deal with it straight up. So we're gonna talk about it, and we will see exactly what is going on. He begins, Mr. President, by making two big, bold announcements. What were those announcements? The budget has several firsts. And after that, he froze. He couldn't tell us a single first in the budget. I listened to this gentleman also, the leader of government business in the Senate. He hasn't told us one of those firsts. The budget has several firsts. That was his first pronouncement. Where are the firsts? I found three of them. I'm going to talk to the House about those in a moment. But his first pronouncement was, the budget has several firsts. And the second one was, there are no new taxes. And of course, that was repeated this morning, there are no new taxes. It's important to look at this claim, Mr. President, about no new taxes. There's a strategy that has been employed by Dr. Mitchell as Minister of Finance in respect of the tax issue. All eyes are on the Minister of Finance when he presents the budget. So when he presents the budget and all eyes are on the Minister of Finance, the taxes are not imposed at that time. No taxes. We're looking at the budget. That's the major statements. No taxes are imposed at that time. When the budget is over and the imposition and everything settles, that's when the imposition of the tax takes place. So let's look at what happened. The government has just introduced an increase in the petrol tax. The budget was read in November 2014. No tax. No petrol tax, you say to the nation. Then, in January, they come to the House and they amend the petrol tax to allow the minister to change the tax rate when he feels like, without having to come back to the Parliament, by doing it with ministerial orders, SROs. That was in January. In May 2015, the ministerial order was passed, the first one, to increase the petrol tax from $3 to $4. In September, another ministerial order is passed to increase the petrol tax from $4 to $5. In October, another ministerial order is passed to increase the petrol tax from $5 to $5.50. And of course, we know, based on what we have seen and heard, you can expect another 50 cents coming. But the Prime Minister could have legitimately said when he presented the 2015 budget, there are no new petrol taxes. Right? So this is the strategy. Do not impose the taxes when the light is shining on you, because you're going to look bad. So you tell the nation, no new taxes, and then after you pass the budget, you impose the taxes. And after this, and what perhaps is really terrible about this, is that he thinks he's getting away with it. But Mr. President, we want him to know. Some of us are watching you, Mr. Prime Minister. Some of us are watching you. We know who you are, and we will expose you for what you're doing. This is a falsehood. And if that mischief is not enough, Mr. Prime Minister, what then he does? He comes and says, my departments, my revenue departments have overperformed. So, I told you you were going to collect $100 million in inland revenue. In fact, you collect $150 million in inland revenue because we're doing well. Right? We're overperforming. Of course you're overperforming. Because one of the tax sources of tax revenue that causes you to overperform, quote unquote, is the one that you did not declare in the budget, and after the budget is passed, you come in and make an announcement about it. You can't trick nobody with that stuff. That's a cheap trick. And Mr. President, we must expose that for what it is. So I want to say, Mr. President, if you want to earn the respect and confidence of the nation as an economic manager, that's not what you do. People are seeing through that. A government that cares cannot approach things in this way. When he was caught with his hand in the cookie jar, in a manner of speaking, he then turns around and sticks his tongue out at the nation in a manner of speaking and say to them, either you agree to take retrenchment or we increase the petrol tax. Either you agree to take an increase in your property tax or we increase the petrol tax. And several others were saying that on radio stations and so on across the country. But Mr. President, it is the ordinary people that are feeling this. Ordinary people feeling it. And those who are feeling it understand that what this government has done is denied the Grenadian people an opportunity to pay lower prices for the gas at the pumps and to live better, considering all the taxes that they're already facing. This is true for the petrol tax. The effect of these taxes must not be forgotten or underestimated. It is known, Mr. President, that there have been 27 different tax measures imposed by this government, and they are across the board, those who have jobs as well as those who don't have jobs, those who have a piece of land as well as those who don't have a piece of land, have nothing, those who are sick as well as those who are not so sick, those who are in school as well as those who are out of school. Everybody is feeling this pressure that we're talking about, Mr. President. And while I'm on the issue of income tax, I just want to say the lowering of this threshold has done severe damage to a number of persons in the country. There are people who went to the bank. I was talking to a young lady from St. Andrew. There are people, Mr. President, who went to the bank and took loans on the strength of their disposable income. One lady, 3 children, one of the kids is very sickly. She went to the bank, took a loan for a mother who herself was not in the best of health. Is now servicing that loan. When she took that loan, she was not anticipating that her salary or disposable income was going to fall in that way. Now she's paying the taxes, she can't service the loan. What does she do? Who does she run to? And in addition to that problem, you have all the other taxes and charges and levies and so been imposed. And of course, with some of these charges, the price of goods have also increased, including the customs service charge on some items. Mr. President, on all items for that matter, but some increased by the importers. Mr. President, we can hear all of these promises, we can hear all of this cheap talk. We heard, for example, that taxes in Grenada is low, that, you know, when you compare the taxes in Grenada, it's so much lower than the ECCU region and so on. I'm sure, Mr. President, that as a statistician, the Minister of Finance must know that the making of a comparison of tax rates across the ECCU paints only a half picture. It paints only a partial picture. In fact, a distorted picture of the realities might well be the case. Why? Because increasing the tax rate in a country like Grenada, where incomes are so low, will definitely have a much more devastating effect on consumers and businesses, for that matter, than it would have in a country where incomes are much higher. At the end of the day, even if the rate is higher, because people's incomes are so much higher, they're still left with more money in their pocket. And the prices are not any higher in St. Kitts or Antigua on basic goods, or St. Vincent on basic goods. So in fact, they have higher disposable incomes. That's the reality. And what matters is at the end of the day, is not any kind of academic exercise in pointing out who has a higher rate and who has a lower rate. At the end of the day, who has more money in their pocket to buy the goods and services that they have to buy? Mr. President, a few comments on unemployment. And I'm taking you through some of the issues that are being presented with half-truths and innuendos to paint a false picture to the nation. Unemployment. The Minister of Finance says unemployment is up because more people are looking for work. That is the reason why unemployment is up, because more people are looking for work. No. After years of trickery, the minister was forced to finally admit that unemployment is increasing in Grenada. This is the first of the firsts. He said there are several firsts when he presented the budget. The first one is, for the first time in the history of the country, he has to admit what he has been telling half-truths and zero-truths about in the previous budgets. That's the first. That in fact, unemployment is increasing in Grenada. Let's not have any confusion about that. The IMF must have finally insisted also that the unemployment figures be accurately reported. But what does he say? Unemployment is increasing, not because businesses are closing their doors, not because thousands of young people are leaving school and unable to find jobs, but because the people who were not working since the NDC was in office and who had stopped looking for work have now decided to come out and look for work. That's the reason why unemployment is going up in the country. In other words, They just discover that they have to eat, they have to send their children to school, they have to buy clothes, they have to buy shoes, they have to pay their bus to go where they're going, and so they decide to come out and look for work. The reason these people have now decided to come out and look for work, he says, is that hope has returned. So they didn't come out in 2013 and look for work. They didn't come out in 2014 and look for work. They came out in 2015. Now, Mr. President, what explains this? Where was the hope in 2013? Where was the hope in 2015? Is this a hunting season for hope? Is 2015 the hunting season for hope? And they come out to hunt like Manico? Is that what we're talking about, Mr. President? This is a big joke. He tries to console those who don't know better by claiming that 3,681 persons found work in 2014. The labor force survey that was done in 2014 said that the number of workers in the central government increased by 2,878 due to the Imani program. Due to the Imani program. That's what the labor force survey said, not me. This means that of the 3,681 persons, remember it said that the labor force, central government's labor force increased from 19.1% of the labor force to 24% of the labor force. And when we worked out the numbers, it shows you, yes, 3,681, of which 2,878 were people who went into the central government. The same Imanis who just gone home, that we say was implied, right? But that's another matter. Now, if 3,681 persons joined the workforce, and 2,878 of them were Imanis. What does that tell you? It tells you that 803 people is who find work. 803 people is who find work in 2014. So don't try to come and tell us 3,681 people find work and making all this kind of sad jokes. Mr. President, we can see through these things. The next joke, really, was that the NDC did nothing, and I heard it repeated this morning about the Taiwan debt. Mr. President, I almost faint when I heard that. I was sitting here. I almost faint when I heard that. Mr. President, the week before the government of Grenada, the new National Party administration government of Grenada, broke relations with Taiwan, our then foreign minister, Honorable Elvin Nimrod, was in Taipei telling the people of Taiwan and paying tribute to the strong and unbreakable bonds of friendship between Taiwan and Grenada. He was the one doing it. By the time Mr. Nimrod got to Grenada, his government had unceremoniously kicked the Taiwanese out of Grenada. They did this without caring or thinking that the Taiwanese would ask them for their loan money. If you were thinking and you're going to break the relationship and you know that you borrow money from a man, 4 different loans from a man, and you're supposed to be paying, and he ain't asking you for the money, and you're going to break up the relationship, before you break the relationship, have a conversation. Listen, brother, I feel like I have to pull away from this. I know I'm owing you some money. Let's talk about how we're going to pay it. You just break relations, don't pay the 4 loans, and of course, you expect that Taiwan will do nothing. NDC didn't do that. Why are you blaming me? I didn't do that. You did it. So let's face it. Now, Mr. President, they say that by July 2005, Taiwan demanded the money. By July 2005, Taiwan demanded the money. The government ignored the demand. By April 2006, Taiwan started legal proceedings. Instead of retaining the services of a lawyer specializing in commercial litigation, and I want the young people, 21, 22 years old, who would have been born in 1993, understand what's going on. Instead of retaining the services of a law firm with the necessary skills and expertise in commercial litigation, the government retained the services of a sole practitioner specializing in immigration law. Send the papers to her. By the way, the wife of one of the ministers of government. Send the papers to her. She did nothing. As a result of which, judgment was entered in default against the government and people of Grenada for over $27 million, US. Now you're turning around and saying, I didn't do anything about it. Don't blame me. Blame yourself. Stand up like a man in front of the mirror and blame yourself. Don't blame me. I didn't do that. It is complete. I mean, to my mind, it is sick, really, to be getting up and saying and blaming us for not paying the Taiwanese loan. I could not believe when I heard it. So somehow I'm responsible for your misfortune. I'm responsible for your problems. Nazim Burke is the problem. Yeah. Mr. President, we must expose these things because this must stop. The Minister of Finance says that unpaid claims when the NNP took office was $110 million in his budget. He made a statement that started immediately after in the first budget, he made some statements in a press conference that unpaid claims were $83 million. Those numbers went up and up and up and up, reaching $118 million in the last presentation he made in New York. When he was in New York on the last trip, he told them $118 million in unpaid claims. So it moved from $83 million to $118 million in unpaid claims left by the NDC administration. What is the fact? What are the real facts? In July of 2014, the International Monetary Fund came to Grenada to conduct what is known in that business as an Article 4 consultation. They do a situation analysis of the economy. They look at all the different macroeconomic indicators. They go into the ministry and get information from the ministries themselves, including the Ministry of Finance. They do their own analysis. They go to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and gather information from the central bank and make a determination of what is the situation. Because the government want help and are desperately looking for IMF relief, they came clean with the IMF and gave them the information that they were looking for. Information lodged in the Ministry of Finance. What did those numbers say? I pulled out from a 124-page document, the Article 4 consultation, Mr. President. I pulled out just the tables relating to unpaid claims. And this is table 5 at page 51 of that document. Yes? What does it show? It shows that unpaid claims, claims to domestic suppliers and statutory bodies, as at the end of December 2012, was $28.7 million US. If I multiply that by 2.7, Mr. President, then we see a very different situation. Yes, we see $77 million. That's what the reality was. Yes, but we must. I'll come back to that in a minute. But this idea that we are bad pay is one that must be picked up as well, because we're hearing all the talk about bad pay, and we must set the record straight. On July the 20th, 2008, Standard & Poor's, one of the most reputable credit rating agencies in the world, reported that Grenada had the lowest credit rating of any country in the Caribbean. This is July the 10th, 2 days after we formed the government, 2008. After 13 years of NNP government, Grenada was the country in the Caribbean that people were most afraid to lend money to. That's what the lowest credit rating means. The country that people are most afraid to lend money to was Grenada on that day. Why is that so? Why are people afraid to lend money to others, Mr. President? It is because you feel if you lend your money, you ain't going to get it back. That is why you're afraid to lend people money. So if Grenada has the lowest credit rating in the Caribbean, it's because people are afraid they won't get their money back. So who bad pay me? We must face the reality. Stop making these sick jokes and let's talk serious. This is management of a country, not a game, as some of the colleagues are calling it. Mr. President, when we came into office in July 2008, unpaid claims stood at $53 million. It was then one of the highest unpaid claims ever reached, $53 million. It included money that was owed to contractors for up to 7 years. It included monies owed to the estate of Eric Gary, dating back to the early 1990s, which were not paid, and other judgments from the early 90s that were not paid. We came to government, governed the country during what was universally regarded as the worst economic crisis to have hit the world since the Great Depression of 1929. When other countries were sending home their workers, we kept everyone on the job. We paid them their salaries. Yes, on 2 or 3 occasions they got it late, but we paid them their salaries. Mr. President, we provided short-term work for thousands of Grenadians in the debushing program, the farm labor support program, the concrete works program, and the community development programs. We did not impose any oppressive taxes. And without imposing oppressive taxes, we introduced social safety net programs such as the free school books program, duty-free barrels program, energy for the poor program. And when we left at the end of it all, unpaid claims stood at $77.49 million. Quote me on that. Unpaid claims stood at $77.49 million US dollars. The new National Party administration continues to range from 83 to 118. The Article 4 consultations make it very clear what those numbers are. What is even more disgusting, Mr. President, is that according to that same study, the IMF document, by the end of 2013, unpaid claims had risen from $77.49 million to $82.62 million. In the 1 year, you moved from 77 to $82 million, increasing the unpaid claims. These numbers, I didn't make them up. They come, I will tell you again the source. Article 4 consultations of the IMF dated July 14th, 2014. Go on the website, or you must have seen that already. You have it. Yes, 77.49 million EC dollars, yes. Mr. President, in similar vein, the government continues to repeat that the NDC did not make its contributions to the international organizations. The same page, the same document would show you that in the Article 4 consultation, the IMF reported that Grenada's unpaid contributions to organizations as at the end of 2011 stood at 34.29 million EC dollars. At the end of 2012, stood at $45.36 million. At the end of 2013, stood at $57.51 million. We were not in office at the end of 2013. These are unpaid claims and unpaid contributions to organizations, again, showing that the numbers are going up. Mr. President, we must expose the zero truths that are being presented here in this House and in the lower house. The next statement that we get up and beating my chest about is that NDC sold assets to the NIS to pay salaries. We're hearing that over and over. NDC sell assets to pay salaries. The Minister of Finance continues to repeat it. Others continue to repeat it. Let's take a closer look at this and ask ourselves some very simple questions, Mr. President. What did NDC do? Answer, sold assets. Whose assets did we sell? Answer, the people of Grenada. To pay whose salaries? Answer, the public workers of Grenada. Who did we sell the assets to? Answer, the NIS. Who owns the NIS? Answer, the workers of Grenada. What did the NIS get from government? Lands and buildings. Answer, what did government get? Answer, cash money. What did Tillman Thomas and Nazim Burke receive as part of the deal? Answer, nothing. Let's take a look now at the other side, the NNP side. What did NNP do? Give away assets. Answer. Whose assets did they give away? The people of Grenada. To pay whose incomes? We don't know. We don't know who got money out of it. Who did they give the assets to? Foreign multimillionaires. What did the foreign multimillionaires get from the government? Mount Hartman, Livera, Blue Lagoon lands, Grand Beach lands, etc., etc., etc. What did the government get? $1 and a cinnamon stick. $1 and a cinnamon stick. I want to repeat that. So when you come in and talk about us selling assets and selling assets, you should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. It is frightening that people can have the guts to come and make these kinds of remarks and saying it on television as if it's so powerful and forceful, and that we are so morally at fault for doing what we did. Look what this government has done. It's an act of betrayal. It's an act of betrayal against the people of Grenada, Mr. President. Let's face the truth. The next statement we're hearing is about payment of government contributions to the NIS. Mr. President, we're hearing this, one of the mantra of the members of this government is, these are the facts. Say after me, these are the facts. That's the statement that everybody makes to give life and some kind of credibility to what they're saying. So, what happened on this contribution to the NIS? Minister Steele, at a post-cabinet briefing in early November, had this to say. We have been making our payments every month since coming into office as required. In addition, we've been paying the arrears left by the NDC. The stock of arrears as of January 2013 stood at $24.2 million. The stock of arrears as of October 2015 stood at $19.8, listen to me carefully, $19.8 million. Therefore, there was a reduction in arrears of $4.4 million. The amount paid to NIS since coming into office was $68.8 million. The monthly contribution of government to NIS was $1.65 million. We are now owing for the months of October and November 2015. These are the facts, he told the journalists. Remember that. When we look at these things, Mr. President, what did we conclude? If the government paid for 32 months and they are paying at $1.65 million per month, they were in office for 32 months, then they paid $52.8 million. When you add to that the $4.4 million of reducing our arrears, it means the total sum that they would have paid is the 52.8 plus the 4.4. That works out to $57.2 million. Yeah? Now, the government is yet claiming they paid off $68.8 million. So what explains the difference of this $11.6 million? The numbers simply do not add up. And that's what we take issue with. The numbers do not add up. And we challenge them because it makes no sense. And any person who understands basic arithmetic recognizes it makes no sense. But worse yet, Prime Minister Mitchell went to a town hall meeting in St. Patrick that same afternoon in November. What did he say? The government paid $68.8 million to the NIS in 2.5 years since coming into office. So the number of 68.8 coincided. When his government came into office, they found $24.3 million. Slightly different, right? But remember, what did Steele say? Steele said 19.8. He says 24.3, right? His government paid off 9.4 of the $24.3 million, and that the arrears now stood at 15 million. I'm not making it up. Listen to the tapes. Listen to the tapes. The arrears now stood at 15 million, when Steele says it stood at 19 million. Yes? Steele said they pay off 4.4. The Prime Minister said we pay off 9.4. He wants to look nice talking to the audience. He says, now we only owe the government, the NIS, for the months of September, October, and November 2015 in 2.5 years. So Steele says we owe him for October and November. Prime Minister says we owe him for September, October, and November. Who is telling the truth? Both of these things cannot be the facts. Somebody is not telling the truth, or both people are not telling the truth. Right? So let's be clear. What does Prime Minister Mitchell say in his budget? He says again, here are the facts. On the arrival in office in February 2013, government arrears to the contributions was $24.2 million. A slight change, 24.2, 24.3. We can ignore that for the moment. At the end of October 2015, the arrears had reached 20.1. Yeah? Not the 19.8 that Minister Steele spoke about, not the 15 million that Prime Minister himself spoke about in St. Patrick, but now it was 20.1. So who is telling the truth? Me? We must accept this. So not the 15 million, not the 19 million, but the arrears now stood at $20.1 million. He says government has paid all contributions that they were owing, which means that since he last gave his interview, they had now paid off the months of September, October, and November. They paid 3 more months. But guess what? The bottom line is the government has paid $68.8 million. So before the 3 months were paid, the bottom line was $68.8 million. After the 3 months are paid, the bottom line is $68.8 million. Who is telling the truth? We cannot play these little games with the nation. And I believe that they must be exposed for what it is. The suggestion, again, that the NDC is taking money from the NIS The minister claims that we took $162 million from the NIS. This is yet another zero truth. We didn't take a cent from the NIS, right? What we did was exchange assets for money. We did so selling treasury bills to the NIS, which they were able to cash in and get back money with 5 and 6% interest. We must ask, how much did the NNP administration take from the NIS? Remember the organic banana project? You remember that project? For which monies were taken from the NIS. The chairman of the board was fired, Mr. President, because she stood her ground and said she's not signing any papers like that. Because the loan itself was not bankable. It was not a bankable project, and therefore she was not prepared to sign the documents, and she resigned from the job. So when you're talking about taking money from the NIS, remember that. According to the budget statement, Mr. President, and this is at, I think, page 116 of the smaller book, interestingly, it says that the government, the NIS, basically is owed $100.9 million. $100.9 million is owed by government to the NIS in respect of the loans that have been restructured. So the loan that has been restructured with the NIS is $100.9 million. For the purposes of what I'm going to say, I'm going to just assume it's $100. I'll leave out the 0.9 because it's easy to calculate with $100. I want to give you a sense of what is going on here because the leader of government business in the House repeated twice, or said first and repeated once, the restructuring of the NIS loan will not impact negatively on the beneficiaries of the NIS. He said it before in his presentations here in this House, and he repeated that today again. But let us see what is going on. We must not forget that the government, the position that the government has reached now where it is saying no haircut, is not a position it started with. It sought to cut that in half by telling the workers they have to take $50 million for the 100. It was because the workers' representatives wrestled with the government on behalf of the workers that this thing was able to stand up. But let us look at it, Mr. President. What does this mean? Remember, the document has not been made available. We haven't seen it. But what does it mean? Government says $100 million is owed to the NIS. So I said 100.9, but let's say 100. These bonds are to be redeemed in full by 2025. That's the present arrangement, before the restructuring. According to those, this is the interest payments that the NIS is supposed to get on these bonds. 4.5% interest for 2013, so that's $4.5 million. 6% interest for 2014, $6 million. 6% interest for 2015, $6 million. 8% interest for 2016, $8 million. 8% interest for 2017, $8 million. 8.5% interest for 2018, $8.5 million. 9% interest for the 6 years from 2019 to 2025. That's $54 million. Yeah? If I add up those interest payments, the government, the NIS, would have collected $95 million in interest payments between now, 2013, and 2025. $95 million in interest payments. Add that to the loan itself, the principal sum of 100, it tells you that if the restructuring does not take place, the government will have to pay the NIS between now and 2025, $195 million. No, you say that we have not been affected by it. So that's where it stands. Under the restructured agreement, the government is going to pay the NIS 3% interest per year on that same $100 million. 3% interest per year on that same $100 million for 25 years. It's a 25-year loan. What does this mean? It means that, first of all, the NIS will not finally get its money back from government in full until the end of 2040. Let's start with that, right? Will not get its money until 2040. It means also that by the end of 2040, the NIS would have collected from government a sum of $175 million at 3% interest, 100 in loan, and $75 million by way of interest at 3% over the next 25 years. So, as a result of this arrangement, government, that NIS have with the government, the government is going to have NIS money 15 years longer than if the restructuring doesn't take place. Because if there is no restructuring, they get the money 2025. As a result of the restructuring, they get the money 2040. Now, if in 2040 you get in $175 million, and in 2025 you would have been getting $195 million, it means this, that this is tantamount to the NIS given, because the NIS, the government will have the money for 15 years more, and still is paying the NIS $20 million less. This is tantamount, this deal is tantamount to the government, the NIS giving the government an interest-free loan for 15 years plus a grant of $20 million. That's what it works out to. An interest-free loan for 15 years plus a grant for $20 million. That's what it is. And then you turn around and you say, it will not negatively affect. Well, work it out. Work it out. It will not negatively affect. This is not compound interest, it's simple interest. 3% interest. Right? So let's see what it is. And Mr. President, I do not accept for 1 minute that the NIS is not going to be negatively affected by this deal. Mr. President, a word on the, let me take the opportunity to call for the publication of that agreement. We have not seen the fine print, we have not seen the details. We need to know what that agreement says. The public is entitled to know that. We are all paying NIS, and we are all entitled to collect NIS, and therefore we should know. Not only a few people need to understand it, we need to understand it. Mr. President, the debt restructuring agreement with the bondholders. Let me say, Mr. President, we welcome the agreement with the bondholders, but we must say that the government should publish the details of that agreement. It is not good to keep that information away from the public. That information must be made available to the public so that we can evaluate and see what the agreement says itself. It's also important, Mr. President, not to give the public a false sense of what was achieved under this agreement. I'm hearing about 540 million one way and another 50 million another way. I've run some numbers, Mr. President, and I'm not seeing those kinds of numbers at all. I'll tell you what I'm seeing. The loan was about $700 million. The government says we are getting a 15% haircut. So it means that the government will save about $350 million from that arrangement, half, yeah? The government has not made any payments in 2013, 2014, 2015. The interest payments on those 3 years that should have been paid, that is not paid, by their own admission is $126 million. It is agreed that that $126 million must be added back, must be capitalized, must be added back to the 350, the other 50%, which means that we are up to $480 million now, even before anything else happens. The debt, the principal debt now on which you're going to be issuing the new bonds is $480 million, right? So it means that already you must deduct from the so-called 350 the 126. That is really part and parcel of the debt itself. You cannot be counting that as a write-off if it's been capitalized, added back to the principal amount, and you have to pay it. Mr. President, there are other considerations. Even if the government gets that haircut, we must not forget that had this restructuring not taken place, the government would have gotten its money back in 2025. Now, the government will not get its money back until 2030. I'm sorry, the creditors, yeah? So it means that government has to pay interest 5 years longer than if they had paid off the debt by 2025. Those interest charges are an opportunity cost that must be built into the arrangement, yeah? When I look at the numbers, that could be as high as $164 million for those 5 years in interest charges, yeah? If we deduct that, it takes us down to $189 million. But the other thing that is important, Mr. President, is that the agreement itself provides that in addition to the debt itself, the creditors can collect from government a share of the CBI. And that share, according to the IMF letter of intent that was last signed, that share is up to 35% of the $480 million. 35% of the new bonds that are issued. So if 35% of the $480 million can be collected by way of payments, I'm not saying it will be, but can be, then it means that the creditor's share by way of CBI could also be another $164 million. Which basically means, Mr. President, if we deduct that, the actual net, the net gain for the government, the net saving for the government is $24 million. I'm willing to share these numbers. I could be wrong, but that's my calculation. And Mr. President, if we say the net gain is $24 million, that does not include, by the way, the charges that are associated with the services, the legal services and the debt advisory services. It is typical for these companies to charge a percentage of the debt itself. It could be 1%, it could be 0.5%, I don't know. But I suspect it's at least 1%. And if it is, we're talking about $7 million on the $700 million that has been renegotiated. If I take the $7 million down from that 24, I'm talking about $17 million. That is net saving. I'm not saying that it is not a good deal. I'm not saying that it is not beneficial. 17 million is better than 0 million. But let's not overstate what is being gotten out of this arrangement. That's all I'm saying. Mr. President, our relationship with the IMF. In the presentation of the budget, and this morning as well, the presenter lamented that we abandoned the IMF and claimed that the phasing of the debt reduction was insisted upon by the bondholders because of the collapse of the IMF program under the NDC. Well, Mr. President, this was the joke of the budget. In 2006, the NNP administration, through the Minister of Finance, said it was going through an economic reform program for the period 2006 to 2008 under a poverty reduction and growth facility with the IMF. According to the minister, in presenting the 2006 budget, he says the program was designed to revitalize the economy, return it to growth and stability, the same language. The objectives: sustain high economic growth, restore fiscal and debt sustainability, alleviate poverty, reduce vulnerabilities, the same ideas. We were told that the program consisted of a number of reform measures that were being implemented that had to be implemented by certain dates, and that the government had put in place people and institutions to ensure the timely and efficient implementation. All of this was said in the 2006 budget. In discussing the sustained high economic growth, enhancing measures, we were told that the economy needed to grow by 4% for the rest for 2006, 2007, 2008, if poverty and unemployment was to be reduced and living standards improve. For that reason, they said that a number of measures had to be taken so that we can grow and living standards improve. By June 2006, the GIDC was going to be reviewed with a view to improving a new investment promotion system. By June 2006, a new investment code was going to be done. By September 2006, a new investment code was going to be done. By June 2006, the land registry will be computerized and upgraded with a view to enhancing accessibility to records to the public and so on. By December 2006, a new executive agency was going to be established to manage the issues of land use and to bring together valuation department, the lands and surveys division in Ministry of Agriculture and the registry of the Supreme Court. By January 2006 also, the government was not going to grant any new concessions. So all of these things were discussed. We were told when the budget was presented that the concern that the government had is that if government did not go ahead with these fiscal measures contemplated, there was a strong likelihood that by 2010, all government revenues will be just enough to cover civil service salaries and interest payments, leaving little room for outlays on goods and services and social safety nets, not to mention the capital program. That was Minister Boson speaking. Yeah? So this is not, so these were the measures that were being talked about. What happened, Mr. President? In 2008, the government scuttled the program. Scuttled the program as elections came, and they realized that they were not, their hands were going to be tied, and that they had to observe a certain fiscal discipline. They said, no way, Jose, we're not going to elections with our hands tied. And they decided to go on the spending spree, as a result of which the IMF decided they are not going to embark upon any of that. They are not going to give out their money to an ill-disciplined organization. As a matter of fact, this is why the report of Standard & Poor's dated the 10th of July 2008, Mr. President, had this to say, quoting, "In fact, the disbursements under the International Monetary Fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, though now being reconsidered by the fund," this is July 2008, "have been on hold since 2006 because of the lack of fiscal discipline." End of quote. This is Standard & Poor's talking. Mr. President, the suggestion of mismanagement by the NDC. This is again something that has been reported time and time again. He goes on to say that as a result of bad governance by the NDC, it eroded Grenada's credibility for upfront relief in the debt structure negotiations. This accusation is so ridiculous and laughable that it left me speechless, Mr. President. I just could not believe that anybody could come and say that. This is a man who, when he came into government, he found a government that was dutifully paying its debt to the international bondholders without even first having a conversation with the creditors, announced to the world that he's going to stop paying them. The creditors then formed themselves into an organization to fight him, and they called on the IMF to step in to impose fiscal discipline, otherwise they will take the country to the cleaners. That's basically what happened here. And so I'm not surprised today that the Honorable Senator was admitting that we are doing what we're supposed to do. Let's not come and pretend here this is some kind of homegrown structural adjustment program. We are doing what we're supposed to do, what they tell us to do. And so, Mr. President, let's get it straight, right? But in any case, to come here now and suggest that somehow is the NDC that caused this problem and we abandon our thing and so on, that must be made. Lest we forget, when the NNP was removed from office in July 2008, the country was overwhelmed by economic and social mismanagement, illegal and corrupt practices, and a lack of transparency and accountability. As I mentioned earlier, Grenada's credit rating was the lowest of any sovereign nation in the Caribbean. Our public debt was 1.7 billion, the fourth largest among speculated grade-rated countries in the world. Our public debt to GDP ratio, 107%. In its report of May 2008, May 21st, 2008, Standard & Poor's noted that the low credit rating was the result of 1, high debt levels, 2, low progress in reducing the debt, 3, poor fiscal discipline, 4, lack of strategic planning, 5, lack of political will to address the country's fiscal and structural issues. The report noted, and I'm quoting here, Mr. President, without resolute fiscal consolidation, the positive momentum which was brought about by the 2005 debt restructuring will be lost, and much needed domestic and foreign investment will be undermined. In fact, they go on, the disbursements under the International Monetary Fund's Poverty Reduction and Growth Facility, though now been reconsidered by the fund, have been on hold because of the lack of fiscal discipline. In commenting on the change of administration in its report of July the 10th, 2008, Standard & Poor's had this to say, I'm quoting again, "In Grenada, the political environment has been equally polarized amidst persistent allegations of the NNP's lack of transparency and mismanagement." This is Standard & Poor's report dated July 10th, 2008. And he goes on, "As Belize and now Grenada show," I'm quoting, "the overwhelming victory of the opposition party is a clear response to the mismanagement, corruption, and consequently electoral dissatisfaction with the ruling party, which was in office for many consecutive years." End of quote. This is the Standard & Poor's speaking. So the obituary of the legacy of the NNP administration can be compared, Mr. President, with what some of these organizations had to say about the NDC administration in its office. That's important because it's important to stop accusing us of mismanagement. In September 2009, this is what the staff of the IMF had to say in September 2009. "Grenada," I'm quoting, "Grenada, like the rest of the ECCU and the Caribbean, has been hit hard by the global economic downturn, a negative shock more devastating than the recent hurricanes in terms of employment and growth." The statement goes on, "The authorities are to be commended for their strong economic and financial management of the Grenadian economy during these turbulent times. Policies have put particular emphasis on protecting employment opportunities and mitigating the impact of the shock on the most vulnerable members of society, while still aiming to keep the economy on a path towards debt sustainability, end of quote. That is the IMF speaking, right? We're not just quoting things that they say we have to do. They're quoting and assessing what we do and how we did it. The authorities, Mr. President, the European Union, the head of delegation in Barbados, Mr. Ambassador Diaz, when he came here in October 2009, this is what he told the media, quote, "The administration of the Ministry of Finance here in Grenada is a kind of model. It's small, but they are efficient, and they are not going to allow the loss of a single cent," end of quote. That is the European Union. The Caribbean Development Bank had this to say: "Grenada must be commended for its swiftness in the preparation of the submissions, having only formally requested CDB's assistance towards financing of the projects in June 2009. The effort that was put into the preparation speaks volumes of the administration's commitment to the development of the country and its people," end of quote. That's the Caribbean Development Bank. So the suggestion that somehow we're mismanaging the country and we don't know what we're doing and so on, I didn't make these statements. I did not tell the CDB to say that. I did not tell the European Union to say that. I did not tell the IMF to say that. These are statements that they made, independent, multilateral organizations assessing the performance of the Grenadian economy. How much time do I have, please? Sorry.